Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. When we look at the Pope today, we usually see a global spiritual guide, right? But that modern image actually masks a really wild, fascinating question. How on earth did a local, pretty marginalized church leader transform into a global monarch? We're talking about mapping the ultimate pendulum swing of history here, tracking the papacy's epic 2,000-year survival story and its completely dramatic shifts on the world stage.
So over the next few minutes, we're going to trace this incredible transformation, and we'll do it by following a constant historical tug-of-war between two deeply symbolic forces, the spiritual crown of faith and the temporal, earthly crown of literal political power.
To get through this massive 2,000-year timeline without getting totally lost, we've broken the whole thing down into 5 quick chapters. Origins of the papacy, the zenith of power, schisms in the Reformation, loss of temporal power, and finally, the modern spiritual pivot.
All right, Chapter 1, Origins of the Papacy, from Peter to Rome. Let's see how this movement built up from a scattered religious sect into a highly centralized power center right in the heart of the Roman Empire.
It happened surprisingly fast. In the early days, we're talking AD 60 to 90, local churches basically operated on their own, guided just by written epistles. But fast forward a few generations, and bam, a massive institutional shift happens. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, this concept of patrine succession really takes hold, and suddenly a full-grown, centralized papacy has emerged in Rome.
And, as you might guess, as Rome started throwing its weight around, claiming a prerogative of judgment over everyone else, it caused some serious friction. I mean, you can totally imagine the turf wars this sparked. Older, established churches in places like Byzantium and Alexandria felt completely sidelined by Rome's sudden power grab. This bitter rivalry actually triggered the initial schism with the Eastern Church, who absolutely disdained this new, centralized Roman authority.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the zenith of power, the earthly crown. We're swinging the pendulum straight into the Middle Ages now. This is the era where the earthly crown takes over completely, and the Pope basically becomes the unrivaled monarch of Europe.
The contrast here is just staggering. It's like night and day. We go from these humble, congregation-appointed leaders, who were strictly focused on local spiritual guidance, to an absolute imperial powerhouse. We are talking about a terrestrial institution that commanded massive armies, levied staggering taxes on sovereign nations, deposed kings whenever it felt like it, and possessed vast, untouchable wealth. And this wasn't just soft influence either. Under Pope Innocent III in the 13th century, the scale of this power was absolute. As historical records note, he literally claimed to be the universal monarch on earth. Even Western emperors, guys who were actually created and crowned by the Pope, were treated as nothing more than mere vassals under his direct, unquestionable authority.
To really grasp the terrifying political weapon of excommunication back then, you have to remember what it actually did. It released a king's subjects from their loyalty to him, basically destroying his rule overnight. So just picture this. King Henry IV of Germany, totally desperate to save his throne after a clash with the Pope, actually stood barefoot for 3 days in the freezing snow, just begging for a priest's forgiveness. I mean, it perfectly captures the ultimate supremacy of that earthly crown.
But Chapter 3, Schisms and the Reformation, the empire bleeds. Because let's face it, immense earthly power inevitably invites intense conflict. And soon we see the devastating fracturing of this political dominance from the inside out.
Get this, there was a painful 40-year period where there wasn't just one, but 3 popes at the exact same time. It was absolute chaos. During the Great Schism, all 3 of these guys claimed to be the true successor of Peter. Each had their own college of cardinals, their own armies, and they were all actively excommunicating each other. You literally can't make this stuff up.
Naturally, this self-inflicted chaos severely damaged Rome's prestige. Sensing blood in the water, monarchs and reformers started landing heavy political and financial blows. Entire nations declared financial independence. France passed the Pragmatic Sanction. England enacted the Statutes of Provisors, all to cut off papal financial reach. And meanwhile, reformers like John Wycliffe and later on Martin Luther openly challenged papal authority, which, as we know, culminated in the massive Protestant Reformation. Secular monarchs suddenly realized, hey, the papacy is vulnerable. King Philip IV of France literally seized the papal banks in Paris, and in a wild display of subjugation, he actually forced the physical relocation of the papacy to France just to serve his own national interests. So the papacy was essentially dragged from its high imperial throne straight into the mud of fierce terrestrial politics. And that leads us right into Chapter 4, Loss of Temporal Power, the Italian Unification. This takes us to the 19th century, marking the absolute, definitive collapse of the papacy's physical, earthly kingdom. With the rapid expansion of national unity across Europe, the newly formed Kingdom of Italy just straight up annexed the Papal States. Almost overnight, the Pope's vast territories vanished. For the very first time in centuries, the Pope was left as a sovereign king without an actual state, forcing the entire institution to retreat and operate strictly inside the walls of the Vatican, almost like it was a fortress.
But here is the brilliant irony of this specific era. At the exact historical moment, the Pope permanently loses his earthly crown and his lands. What does he do? He officially defines the dogma of papal infallibility. He declares that his spiritual crown, when speaking officially on doctrine, is absolute and unquestionable. So the temporal power was gone, for sure, but the spiritual power, that was fiercely consolidated.
Which brings us to our final section, Chapter 5, The Modern Spiritual Pivot, A New Global Mission. Stripped of its land, its armies, and its political fiefdoms, the modern papacy was forced into a massive reinvention just to survive the 20th and 21st centuries. To survive, the whole institution had to reinvent its toolkit, those old political fiefdoms, replaced by the largest diplomatic network on the planet. Instead of commanding violent crusades, the modern Vatican actively promotes interfaith dialogue. And rather than enforcing laws over rival kings, it uses its massive, unique platform to advocate for social justice and human rights on a global scale. It's a complete 180. A really prime example of this soft power pivot is this incredible meeting in 1964. Pope Paul VI actually traveled to Jerusalem to meet with the Orthodox Patriarch Athenagoras I. Think about why this is such a big deal. This monumental effort reached right across the very same Eastern schism that had bitterly divided the Christian world since those early turf wars we talked about in Chapter 1.
Yet, even as they attempt this huge global pivot, the papacy still faces some really severe hurdles. They have to navigate increasingly secular, diverse societies. It's exactly the delicate tightrope walk you see playing out in the news today, right? Balancing ancient, traditional dogma with modern societal questions and trying to maintain global relevance without compromising their core spiritual mission. It's not easy.
So ultimately, after witnessing this incredible survival and evolution over 2 millennia, going from humble local epistles to a massive earthly empire, and now to a global diplomatic voice, we're left with a really profound question. As our world rapidly modernizes, can this ancient spiritual monarchy actually continue to adapt its 2 crowns? Or will it eventually find itself permanently locked in the past? That's the real question, isn't it?